Are you confused? This channel is obviously about Burkhard Heim's six-dimensional theory. But elsewhere you might have heard that his theory actually comprised 12 dimensions. In this video, I'm going to clear up your confusion. Hello and welcome to 6 Dimensions in Color. My name is Schmid, and on this channel I present to you the worldview of Burkhard Heim in understandable language and with clear examples. Well, obviously, my channel bears the name 6 Dimensions. So when I'm talking about Heim theory, I'm talking about a world, a universe with 6 dimensions. But across the internet, and even here on YouTube, you also find claims that Heim's model involved 6 more dimensions, 12. So what is the real story? Let's unpack what Heim truly developed and how the idea of 12 dimensions came about. Burkhard Heim was a true child prodigy, a brilliant mind in natural science and philosophy. But fate struck early, and at the age of 19 he lost both his hands and almost all of his hearing and eyesight. Maimed like this, he still managed to study theoretical physics, and he took up the biggest of all challenges, to unify the forces of nature, unify quantum theory with general relativity, a problem that physicists still wrestle today. And this was his solution, which he found as far back as the 1950s. The forces of nature can only be unified in a universe which has 6 dimensions. And unlike string theory or supersymmetry, which assume even dozens of additional dimensions, Heim gave his extra 2 a true experiential meaning. Dimension 5 is the ancient concept of entelechy, an immaterial but yet very real realm of organizing principles. That's what makes particles come together to form unlikely and improbable forms, like life itself. Dimension 6 is the teleological era of time, the dimension of evolution, development, fate and purpose. That force that drives things into developing into what they truly can become. The extra dimensions of the other models mentioned, they are purely mathematical. They are not real in any common sense of the word. They are just abstract postulates. Burkhard Heim worked with the 6D model for decades. From it, he derived his mass formula of elementary particles. He derived a model that includes the paranormal phenomena and even gives insight into the nature of the afterlife. In 1981, then, Heim published his works in the form of 2 thick books. But as this was not adhering to the rules of scientific publishing, this work was poorly received. And yet, those books were read by many who were interested, among those, one mathematically highly gifted Austrian mathematician by the name of Walter Dröscher. Walter Dröscher spotted mistakes, suggested didactic improvements, and Heim listened, and he had the future editions of his books amended accordingly. But Dröscher also discovered another thing. He discovered that by extrapolating Heim's dimensional law, he could derive a formula from which you could state which kind of universe can be embedded in another, in terms of how many dimensions can be fit into a higher dimensional model. And from this equation, he derived the highest possible solution, which is 12. A 6-dimensional universe can be embedded in a 12-dimensional universe. And from then on, Heim and Dröscher together worked on what these additional dimensions might mean. They found that the first additional 2 dimensions, x7 and x8, could serve as something they called information space, and this allowed to derive both the equations of quantum theory and general relativity from a common source, and derive some of the constants of nature from abstract group theory. But the question remained, it remains till today, are these 2 extra dimensions real, or are they just mathematical abstractions like in the other models mentioned? As I see it, there are no arguments available to support their ontology. And the further dimensions, 9 through 12, they were even less grounded and could only be described as abstract, highly symmetrical mathematical objects. That's as far as Heim and Dröscher both got. This vagueness opened the door for wild speculation. Soon people began to project everything into 12D Heim theory, from the Akasha Chronicles to the Holy Spirit, even God himself. Even while Heim was still alive, but especially after his death, this spun wildly out of control, and it did a lot of damage to Heim theory because he was, without his own doing, associated with shallow esoteric concepts. But meanwhile, there is a totally different level of injustice that happened. You see, Heim and Dröscher wrote a book back then, which was often perceived as the third book or the continuation of books 1 and 2, which it wasn't. It's completely different content. But its cover bore, in the first edition, both Burkhard Heim and Walter Dröscher's names. But in the later editions, the publisher, Resch Verlag at Innsbruck, he removed Dröscher's name from the cover and even from the inside of the book. He probably thought it's better marketing if he put Heim there, because no one knew Walter Dröscher. Heim had a certain reputation back then. But the 12D model, in truth, was Walter Dröscher's original idea, and he did most of the work. I met Walter Dröscher a couple of times in Vienna. Actually, he only passed away this year, quite recently. And he told me how deeply disappointed he was, both by the publisher erasing his name and his contribution from the book title, and how people twisted his theory into spiritual marketing. Interestingly, Dröscher abandoned the 12D model after Heim's death and then worked for a while with an 8D model before, in recent years, he then worked with guess what, a model with 6 dimensions. Though admittedly, those 6 dimensions have a completely different semantics and an understanding as Heim's original 6D model. But in all of his work, Dröscher never was focused on the ontological and philosophical side of the physical concept he was developing, but rather on making them fit into contemporary concepts and thoughts that are more or less mainstream in physics. But most importantly, about the difference between 6D and 12D models is that neither Heim nor Dröscher ever made an effort to incorporate Burkhard Heim's most important piece of work, you might say masterpiece, intellectual masterpiece, centrometry. The manuscript of centrometry only became available after Heim's death. It's now freely available online for download. If you feel really up to delving deeply into Heim theory, I want to invite you to join our community on Discord. All you need to do is click on the link in the video description. You find a lot of source material, mostly German admittedly, but also a modernized and English version of centrometry. Centrometry is essential for understanding Heim's work because it formalizes how nature cannot be reduced to linear thinking and binary logic. Heim stated, nature simply doesn't operate this way. Our way of anthropomorphic binary logic is too narrow. Instead, centrometry introduces a formal system of how to distinguish in general between qualities. Not just distinguishing between numbers and equations, but between any kind of things. On the importance of it, I want to quote Heim. He stated, "The additional dimensions and their properties are by no means a step into transcendence, because these additional coordinates are stocks of numbers, just as other coordinates are. Simply adding dimensions, that is, sets of numbers, to reality doesn't solve the mysteries. In fact, it distracts from what Heim actually wanted to do. Almost anything people claim about these higher dimensions can be found in the 6D model already, if you understand it properly. Centrometry is a really big concept. Imagine it as something of which the whole of mathematics, of mathematical thinking, of mathematical logic, is just a small subset. I think to truly grasp this, you need more than logic, you need intuition. real understanding comes from the synthesis of information and emotions. This is the real bottleneck of everything we learn, because we are too much focused on the importance of linear thinking and binary logic. But that's completely untrue. The greatest minds of history and of science, they more or less all stated that intuition is the primary way of acquiring knowledge, of getting new ideas. The good news is, intuition is something that can be trained. The damage that was done at school to you can be undone, and the most effective way to do that is NATHAL training. If you're curious about how this works, go to my website nathaltraining.ae and subscribe to my Instagram channel. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to further explore Heim's universe without the myths and distortions, then don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel, and continue your journey through 6 dimensions in color.